Treiber. I'd like to introduce you to a very unique and interesting club called Ancient Mariner. Now, this club is a group of people that meet once a month. They get together, they talk about the projects they're working on, different things they're involved with, but basically it's about shipbuilding, and it's about model shipbuilding. And the type of ships they're building is what we call plank on hull, or most of them are in a way. And this procedure of trying to build a ship similar to what they were built many years ago is very interesting. Now, the type of ship you'll probably see is, of course, more of the old ancient sailing type vessel, which is what most of those ships were at that time. So that portion will relate to a more historic value. And as the guys go through this thing, they're going to give us some historic information on all these ships they built, which is going to be great. Now, when we talk about, there's one word we need to talk about, that's ancient. Ancient, yeah, ancient could apply to a lot of things, but basically the group is really not ancient. However, I must say we are all senior citizens. So that brings up another point. The interesting part about this being is that we as senior citizens can still build, detail, and create models that are very unique. And this is why we're making the video, is so we can show you some of the fine workmanship that's been done over the many, many years by a lot of dedicated people. And I think as we go through this, you're really going to enjoy watching some of the projects these fellows built. Thanks again.
Hi, my name's John Strachan, and I've been building model ships for about 20 years. And I first got interested in it, I guess because my father worked for Gibson Cox, a naval shipbuilder in New York, and used to bring home pictures of all kinds of ships. Prior to building model ships, I was always involved in building model airplanes, flying model airplanes made out of balsa wood, etc. But model ships seem to have more of a history attached to them, and that also attracted me. So I started off building small little sailing vessels and canoes and that type of thing, and I eventually ended up building ships, basically ships that covered the periods from the 1500s up until modern day whaling ships. Some of the ships I built have set world records, such as the Flying Cloud, which was built in New York City and sailed from New York City to San Francisco during the gold rush and set a world record for that time. It took them 86 days and 20 hours to go from New York to San Francisco. That record held up for 100 years. I've also built whaling ships, one of which was the Charles W. Morgan, and that ship is still afloat after 100 years, and it's up in Mystic Seaport in Connecticut. Well, I'd like to really show you some of the ships I've built and tell you a little bit more about their characteristics, and as we view them, I will show you their features. Well, I've already gave you a few facts about the Charles W. Morgan, but some of those, some facts I did omit. One of the things was that the Morgan was 113 feet long and had a beam of 27 feet 6 inches. She also had 13,000 square feet of sail, which was quite a bit of sail. A lot of people don't realize what a whaling ship was for. It wasn't just to kill whales, but it was to capture whales, to get the blubber so that they could get the oil to light the lamps of that period. Here's a bow shot of the Morgan, and it shows the bowsprit and the lines that went to and from the ship to the end of the bowsprit. We also see the anchor hanging below. Sometimes the anchor was also stored up along the top side of the bow. This shows a scaffolding that after a whale was brought to the side of the ship, the seamen would get down on this scaffolding and start cutting the blubber away. It was a very dangerous place to be because of the grease and the oil and the scarceness of platform. This is just a stern view of the Morgan, and you can see lifeboats on both sides. The Morgan, I believe, carried 5, I said lifeboats, but they're whale boats, carried 5 whale boats, and they always carried a spare up on top, as you can see. Here's another bow view of the Morgan showing the deck and also the black item, that horizontal item there is a capstan, which was used to either haul sails aloft or to bring the anchors up from the bottom. Here's another close-up view of the capstan. Those 2 vertical lines, spread lines that you see going through the deck are stays from the mainmast down into structures below the deck. This is another view showing a lazy seaman there in a red shirt, smoking his pipe and taking his time. Another view, the whaleboats showing some of the equipment that is aboard these whaleboats, and later on I'll show you a close-up in a larger scale of a whaleboat and the equipment that was carried. Here again we have another lazy salesman. He's leaning against a structure, the white structure was called a chicken coop, and actually had chickens in there for fermenting the meals of the seamen. You can also see barrels. I'm not sure what these barrels contain. It could be water, it could, but I doubt that it's oil. Most of the oil was stored below decks. The 2 funnels or stacks, copper-clad stacks that you see on top, are the funnels from what they call the tie works. And the tie works they took the blubber that was cut from the whales and put them into these furnaces to melt down the fat into the blubber into oil. Here's a view of the mainmast. I believe it's the mainmast, just showing the intricacy of all the lines that hold the mast erect. This shows the glass topping above one of the main cabins below. This shows the forward section of the deck and how the crew were spread about idly when there were no whales to turn into oil. Here they are again, loafing around on board deck, waiting for something to do. Here's that view of the expanded view of a typical whaleboat. And most whaleboats throughout the fleet, the whaling fleet, were pretty much duplicated. This one shows a whaleboat with a mast laying down below because a lot of times they were so far from the mother ship they had to resort to sailing rather than just rowing about. You'll notice one of the oars has 3 black bands around it. All the oars in a whaleboat were banded like that, and that showed the position of where that rower was supposed to sit, and it went like from maybe 1 to 5 bands. So that was just a matter of identification. Below the oars and the masts, you can see 2 tubs full of rope, and this was the rope that spun out when the harpooner harpooned the whale. Another view of the rope buckets, and also you can see two harpoons. They are the different color. They're the tan-colored items with a rope attached, and these were the harpoons or the spears that they would throw into the whale. I've mentioned the Flying Cloud before. It was called a clipper ship, and it was not what they called an extreme clipper ship, but still a clipper ship as such. And one of the reasons they called them that was the extreme speed that they could obtain compared to other ships. And part of that was a function of the way the bow was cut sharply. And also, the beam was very narrow for a ship that size, which made them extremely fast. Normally, as I previously mentioned, this ship set the record from New York City to San Francisco during the gold rush days, and it had to go around Cape Horn to do that. And that record held for a number of years, as I had mentioned before. Normally, the sailing time was 200 days from New York to San Francisco. However, as I mentioned before, she set a sailing record of 89 days and 21 hours. Should also mention that the Flying Cloud was built in 1851 and had a 5,032 square feet of sail. She was 235 feet long and 41 feet in berth. Here's a section of the bow, and incidentally, I've had this ship under glass for almost 20 years, and we attempted to take the glass off to take this picture, and it has been stuck to the bottom of the table that's supporting it. So some of these views might be a little cloudy because of taking pictures through the plexiglass. Here's a midsection of the ship showing the crew's quarters and the various holds, and also the lifeboats which they stored on top of the cabin there. It's a good picture of the shrouds coming down and the back stays and the shrouds, and it exemplifies the amount of rigging that these ships require to sail them. Stern view of the Flying Cloud, again showing the shrouds and the rear portion of the deck. Mainmast, again with all the lines going to and from the various pins down on the deck, which enabled the seamen to manage the sails according to what the captain wanted. On the mast, you can see the spars, and also that looping line that you see underneath the spar is where the seamen used to have to stand to roll up the sails when they weren't in use. Stern view, and including the main section of the deck, showing you the size of the ship, which, as I said, was 235 feet long. Here's a good sharp view of the bow of the Flying Cloud, again exemplifying the sharpness of the bow. Incidentally, you'll notice the copper along the bottom. Before they put copper sheathing on the bottom of the ships, they were subjected to rot caused not only by the seawater and the length of time in the water, but they were also parasites, sea worms, and stuff like that would start eating into the hull. So they came along with this idea of coppering hulls, and most of the later ships would be coppered. Top view of the bowsprit, and a good view of the overall looks of the ship. Again, this you can see the thicker lines are the stays, fore and aft stays, and then the vertical lines again are the shrouds. This is a British schooner, and was named the Lyle, and I understand there were several British admirals that had that name Lyle, and I'm sure that's why they named this ship Lyle. It's a schooner, and it was sailed with the British Navy as a supply ship. It carried water, gunpowder, food, and that sort of equipment to supply the fleet. It was at the Battle of Trafalgar with Lord Nelson. Incidentally, this is a kit, and I obtained it from a company in Italy named Como. And when I got the kit, all the drawings, and there were about 10 sheets of drawings, and they were all in Italian. So I had to go out and buy a English-Italian dictionary so that I can interpret the drawings. However, I must say it was a well-constructed model, and the drawings were really very good once I learned how to understand them. This is a section of the forward part of the ship showing the huge capstan that they had. Again, the capstans were used for holding the sails up and also to bring the anchor aboard. Speaking of the anchor, you'll notice that peanut-shaped obstacle hanging on the shrouds. That was what they called an anchor locator, or some similar term. When they dropped the anchor, they would also drop this buoy. It would float on the water, and it would indicate just where the anchor was dropped, and that would help them haul it back on board. Top view of the Lyle, showing the overall schooner profile. Bow view of the Lyle, and here you can see the anchor, a line holding the anchor to the right, and that went to that anchor buoy I mentioned earlier. Some of the wood that you see sticking up through the rim of the ship are actually the ribs of the ship, and I'm not quite sure why they left those up like they did, but that's where they came from. You can also see what they call the cat head sticking out from the top rail, and that was the structure that supported the anchor and was used to haul the anchor aboard and also to lower it. Another good view of the how the anchor was secured to the ship, and sometimes the anchor was also brought up higher and rested on the rail, but that's not always the case. A stern view of the Lyle, showing the open hatches. One of the unique features here on this ship is the way the steering gear was arranged. It looks like it's a block and tackle arrangement, and the steerman would move to the left or to the right, and in order to steer the ship. Stern view of the lantern on the rear, and I kind of named this ship the Black Swan. Here's a view of the cannons on board the Lyle, and showing the breaching ropes. And they were necessary because when the cannon was fired, the cannon would back up very rapidly, and these would contain it so it would not break away and you'd have a loose cannon running around the deck. Top view of the mainmast, again showing how the stays and the shrouds were wrapped around the mast, and also you'll notice that there seems to be a heavier wrapping around the mast rather than the shrouds itself. And this was to prevent the chafing of the shrouds and the stays. This view shows not only the main guns that I showed, but also these little cannonades that they had on board. And they were a much smaller caliber, but they were used for close-up support. Lifeboat on board the Lyle. That's a good view of the capstan, by the way. You'll notice there's holes in the capstan. A lot of times they would have, in fact, I do show a pole on the right-hand side. That was used to turn the capstan when they wanted to make minor adjustments. good view of the lifeboat showing water chests and also tools and the oars. This is like the Kate Corey. This is another whaleboat. And the thing about the Kate Corey was that she was specifically built for the job of whaling. A lot of the earlier whaleboats were former freighters and that such, and they were converted to whalers. But the Kate Corey was built specifically for the whaler. She was built in 1856 and weighed 132 tons. She was only 75 feet long and 22 feet in the beam. Another interesting fact about the Kate Corey is that she only made 5 trips after she was launched, and she was captured and burned by a Confederate ship called the CSS Alabama off the coast of Brazil. This is a stern view of the Kate Corey. She only had 3 whaleboats on her, but again, they were fully equipped with sails and harpoons and the like. A bow view showing all the dead eyes, how they were lined up on the shrouds, and also, again, the capstan with the holes in it. This, again, is a horizontal capstan. Yes, looking between the shrouds, you can see the tie pots. That's where they melted the blubber. And as I said, it's typical on all of the whalers. That's the only way they could reduce the fat into oil and then store it below. You can see a rear view of the tie pots here. You'll notice there's a couple gray curtains, and actually they would slide those apart and bring out a lot of the burnt coal, etc., that was used to burn the blubber. A view showing the copper-clad bottom. And also, one thing I noticed, and I should have noticed it when I built this ship, that unlike the Charles W. Morgan, you don't see that scaffolding along the side of the ship where the whales were drawn up. I don't know why they omitted that in this kit, and if I had done my research properly, I would have added it. One of the things that happened while Duane and I were taking pictures of the ships, you'll notice that big blue spot, and that was a reflection from somewhere that we weren't sure of, so it's nothing of importance pertaining to the ship. Overall view of the Kate Corey, I thought she was a beautiful little ship, and it was too bad that she was only allowed to make 5 trips, but that's what happens in war. All right, this is the Yacht Mary. She was built in 1660 in Holland, and she was given as a gift from the Dutch East India Company to King Charles at the time. King Charles had lost the throne, and he regained the throne, and that was the reason for the gift from the Dutch East India Company. She was only 52 feet long and 19 feet on the beam. She sunk in 1675 after she hit a reef off Ireland. They call her a yacht, but actually she did a lot of sailing between England, Scotland, and Ireland. She did not have a deep keel, and you can see these paddle-like devices on the side of the ship. They were located on both sides of the ship, and because she didn't have a deep keel, they used these paddle-like devices to help steer the ship and also to keep the ship on an even keel. Here's a bow view of the Yacht Mary. The Yacht Mary, as you'll see in some later slides, was very heavily decorated, naturally, because it was a king's ship. Front view showing the cat heads, some of the decorations along the bowsprit. She was also armed, even though they called her a yacht. She wasn't heavily armed, but she did have several cannon on board. Here's a good view of the shrouds going up, and again the sideboards there. And notice the gild around the cabin there. There's the guns I talked about. And again, the extensive gold gild work. Again, more gold. Notice the chains hanging down attached to the anchor. Those are called anchor pendants. A lot of times the anchor, due to the waves or whatnot, would jump out of its place, and these pendants would allow them to retrieve the anchor and reinstall it. Nice view of the top view of the ship. Good view again of the bow, showing the catheads, the gratings on the deck. It's a view showing the gratings, which allowed ventilation, and also it could be removed for stowing stuff below. One of the things that most modelers get wrong is the size of the openings in the grating. If the openings are too wide, these sailors used to walk around and they had heels. Some of them had heels on their shoes, and they would get them stuck in the grating. I'm not quite sure that I got the right scale on this grating, but that's just an interesting point. We're also showing the cannon with its breaching rope. Again, as I said, when a cannon was fired, it would roar back, and these breaching ropes would keep it stable. This is the Golden Hind, and the reason, and it's what they call a galleon, and it dated from 1577 to 1580. She was built specifically for Queen Elizabeth, and it was built to circumnavigate the globe, and she was captained by Sir Francis Drake. The Golden Hind was 102 feet long and 20 feet in berth, normally carried about a crew of 80 to 85 men, and she had 22 guns on it, although my ship, I only show, I believe, 10. Again, if you do your research, I should have caught that and added the other guns. They were probably mounted up on the railing for protection. She went around Cape Horn and basically was sailing off the Pacific side of South America, where she began capturing Spanish gold ships. You know, the Spanish were stealing all the gold from the Indians in South America, and they usually came back loaded with gold. And the Golden Hind intercepted several of those ships. And evidently on her first voyage, she caught enough gold to pay off Queen Elizabeth's debts and also had a surplus. A good front view. These ships were very decorative, again, because they were part of the royal family, I suppose. You'll notice the method of stowing the anchor on this ship. The anchor is stowed between the deadeyes and not hanging below the cathead, this is not a abnormal practice. A lot of ships stowed their anchors in that manner. A lifeboat with oars and water for the ship. Again, the guns they're rigged out. There's also there, you'll notice on the lower left-hand corner, there's a pump, and that was to pump the bilges, keep them dry as possible. Stern view of the Golden Hind. Again, as I said, they were very decorative, and this is a good example of that. This is a view of the crow's nest up on the foremast of the ship, where people would climb up the shrouds, get in there, and then from there they would go out on the spars, and you can see the foot ropes below the spar. I've also noticed the way the sails are furled. When the sails were not in use, the crewmen would have to get up there and string out along the spar and roll the sails up so they would be neat and not be flapping around. Stern view, again showing the decoration, and I'm not sure what the ER stood for. I should have looked that up. I didn't. But again, a view of the anchor pendants hanging below to save the anchor in case it got washed overboard. Very good view of a three-quarter view of the bow. Again, showing how nicely the sails are furled. And also notice the figurehead way up on the bowsprit there. That's your golden hind. Also notice that since this ship was built in the 1500s, late 1500s, it was not copper clad and was probably subject to all those worms, etc., that would rot the bottom out. It's the USS Constitution, built in 1798. We're going to show you a section view. This section is probably about amidships of the ship. And what we're going to show is what really is below decks. Most models, you never see what is below decks, and I think this is an excellent way in model building to show what goes on below decks. At the very bottom, you'll see a bunch of rocks and some barrels. The rocks were for ballast in the ship, keep the ship upright, and of course, those barrels could be water or they could be gunpowder. I'm not sure what they put down that low. Then you go up to the next deck, and again, they've stored rope there and all kinds of barrels. And if we probably moved forward on this, you would see cruise quarters and hammocks and guns, etc. But this, again, you'll notice on the next deck up, you'll see guns. So I'm not sure whether the Constitution was had guns on 2 decks or 3 decks, but probably just 2. Again, showing the breaching ropes and the staircases from the main deck down below. Here we again show part of the top for the main mast. One of the interesting things, as I said, I've only built this sectional view of the Constitution, but we have 1 or 2 other people that we know of that are building full-scale models of the Constitution, some as big as 48 inches. And that's going to be very interesting to see those ships when they're completed. We're going to talk about the Sultana now. The Sultana was active from 1767 to 1772. She was a schooner, and she was 50 feet long and 16 feet on the beam. The funny part about this story, this ship, was it was built in Boston. And after it was completed, it was sold to England for the Royal Navy. After the Royal Navy had her in England for a while, she was sent back to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and there she loaded up English troops and sent back to the colonies as a Coast Guard vessel, and also landed the troops that fought in the Revolutionary War. It seems very strange that we would sell ships to the British to come back and fight us, but that was the history of the Sultana. As I said, it was only 50 feet long, but it was well armed because it was a Coast Guard, initially a Coast Guard vessel, keeping the American fleet at bay. This is a bow view of the Sultana, again showing the horizontal capstan and the pin rail around the main mast where the ropes were secured, and again the catheads protruding above the bow. Typical hatch cover, and you'll notice the ropes coiled along the where they came off the pin rails down to the deck. They were coiled in a neat fashion. I've also showed some of the tools used on the cannons. You'll notice a big plunger-type device that we used to clean out the barrel of the cannon. This is a good view of the rear of the ship, showing the numerous swivel guns located on a railing above the deck. This was quite a common practice, and these guns were used basically for close-up encounters where they could sweep the other combatants' deck. Good bow view of the Sultana. Stern view of the Sultana, all pretty much the same. I could talk about the shrouds for a minute. You notice the shrouds are going up. The main shrouds, of course, are in the black color. The other horizontal pieces that you see there are called ratlines, or ratlins as they're called, and that's what the sailors used to climb to get up to the sails and the crow's nest. That concludes my presentation on some of the ships that I've built, and I had very much enjoyment out of building ships, and I think it's an art that should be preserved, and I think that clubs like the Ancient Mariner will perpetuate this art, and I think it's very good. I don't know whether I'll continue building, but I know that I still will be very much interested in the art.